I struggle with steeper climbs that come late in a long ride. I know the immediate answer to this statement is don't we all? And yes, don't we all, right? Nate's shaking his head. He's like, I'm fine. I have no issues. Um, but he says, is there a particular approach to training that can improve this scenario, eradicate the dread of a late climb, and prevent the total collapse in form and power towards the end of a ride? With 3 young children, I only have time for 4-hour-long workouts a week with a 4 to 5 hour ride at the weekends. And I'm currently on sweet spot base level 1. So that's actually a really good amount of training right there. If you can train 4 times a week for an hour and then 4 to 5 hours, bam, you have a lot to work with there. She says, many thanks, 5 stars. My life would be very different without you. All the best in these tough times. Thanks, Dom. That feels great.
Can I start with this one? Because this
Please, Nate.
is the thing that I do better in any race. Always at the end of the race, I am passing people. And at the Fire Road race, actually on all the Pikes Peak stuff besides the first day, at the end of the race, I have relative to other people, we're all going to go down, right? But relative to other people, I am passing so many more people at the end of a race. And it feels so good. It gets you in this great mindset when you set it up. And there's 2 things. One is pacing at the beginning, but the biggest thing is nutrition. And at the end of the race, I tell people, I was even with some pros and they're like, how much are you eating per hour? And I was like, oh, like 120 grams of carbs. And one of the guy, Cody, who fell apart later on in the race was like, that's insane. I can't imagine that. And it is something you need to train and you need to practice it in order to absorb that. But if you can do that the whole race, at the end of the race, there's so much more like, chutzpah, I don't even say, like you have this kind of like feeling inside of you that when you start passing people too and everyone's falling off like flies, it is motivating. And you also, this happens to me, is I say, wow, the race is only 30 minutes to the end. Like there is a whole nother level of, if you are passing people, there's in 30 minutes of the end, a whole nother level of motivation that you get. Where the opposite, oh man, it's 30 minutes to the end, I'm dying and everyone's passing me. That is the opposite, right? You just want it to be over. You want to like back off and let go of the pain. The other big thing I think that really helps me on this, 2-hour TrainerRoad rides. Spinning for 2 hours consistently without any breaks. A lot of riders don't do that. And the amount of muscular endurance, especially with sweet spot that I have compared to what I used to have, makes it so at the end of even like 4 hours of outside riding, my legs aren't fried, right? And if I have systemic like nutrition inside of me, I can't go over threshold, but I can go right up to threshold and just keep it there and keep it there for a long time.
Yeah, it's so nutrition is absolutely the biggest thing that I've noticed as well. If you find this is all of us think that we eat enough, but just like we talk about taking some time to measure things with like MyFitnessPal, that brings a level of awareness to you where you go, oh wow, okay. So when Nate's talking about grams of carbs per hour taken in, we usually, like, a lot of people refer to 90 as like this theoretical limit that the body can absorb. However, that's being disproven with time. Now we're seeing the fact that people can process more than that. And I usually aim for somewhere around 110, 115 grams of carbs per hour. What that looks like in terms of what I'm taking out on the bike, and everybody should actually look at this when you ride, write down what you ate and then look at it, or what you drank, what you took in, and then look at it over the time of the ride, and you'll be surprised. You're probably not taking in that many at all. So what that looks like for me is a bottle of mix an hour, and that bottle of mix is going to have, I don't know, somewhere around 80 grams of carbs in that bottle that I'll be drinking. And then in addition to that, I'll be taking in a gel that's going to give me somewhere around 30 grams, 35 grams of carbs that I'll be taking in, 40 grams. Depends if I can get all the gel out of the package while going through bumps. But that's about 35 grams of carbs. So then I add that on, and then I may even be taking in, sipping on another bottle thereafter. So it ends up getting to the point where if I continually take that in, and like Nate said, you have to train with it, it's not only that you feel that you don't fade in the race. Like Nate said, it's actually a big motivation increase, because there's a difference. Like when you're depriving your body of glycogen and you're wearing it down, not only does your physical performance suffer, but your mental performance suffers substantially and your motivation really gets hurt. And if you're looking at anything like a stage race, the worst thing you want to do is have a bad stage or bad finish to a stage. I don't know if you've noticed that, Amber, but like when you have a good finish to a stage, like that momentum really helps on the following day. And the same thing goes treat every week of training like a stage race. From workout to workout that you do, and you end a workout on a really strong note, man, it feels good. Have you noticed that, Amber? At least like in your experience with stage racing and everything else like that? Because being a domestique, you probably had to run yourself into the ground repeatedly. So
Yeah, you don't, I mean, it's always better to end a day strong and on a high note, because yeah, you don't have to spend that mental energy of like digging yourself out of an emotional hole when you're done with the race. The other piece of it, I mean, the competitive side of me will just say, like, there is no better feeling in a race than suffering, but at the same time knowing that the people around you are probably suffering at least incrementally less than you are. Like, that kind of suffering can actually feel good. So if you're eating well at the beginning of the race and you're pacing appropriately, and you can be that person that's suffering less at the end of the race, it's a pretty motivating sensation.
Mhm. Yeah.
And
Chad,
what I
sorry,
find especially mystifying about this, and I'm going to let the self-criticism fly, is that it's such an easy thing to hone. I mean, everything we put into our mouths on a ride is really easy measurable. One scoop of this powder is this many grams. One gel, it says right on the package, is this many grams. One bar, one bag of blocks. I mean, you know for a fact. I mean, when you sit down and you have a cheeseburger and French fries, you can kind of guess at what you're getting, but you know specifically how many grams of carbohydrate are going into the system. So if you need to figure out, do I need 60? Do I need 80? Do I need 100? It's a matter of eating one more gel and seeing how things go. So it's such an easy thing to dial that nobody, myself included, has an excuse for not getting it right.
Yeah. And the other thing too, John, people have been listening to this for a long time. You used to be like, I'm fussy. I can't do it. 60 is my limit, all this sort of stuff. And then what was was it Leadville? What was the thing that switched you over to be able to eat a lot?
It was training with it. It was treating even the hour-long workouts. Like, I know, everybody, I don't need to fuel that workout like crazy when it's pettit, right? But the thing is, that's not my goal. When I fuel those workouts, I'm trying to train my body to be able to take that in. That's actually going to have a way bigger impact than me trying to starve myself for a ride where I don't need fuel. That's not going to help me get faster when we talk 6 months down the road,
But you got
right?
really fat, right?
No, I actually lost weight
You
because I was able to
didn't?
do more work. Mind
Whoa.
blowing, right? So, because the thing with this is, if your body can't take it in, it's a surefire way to ruin your race. Like, if you can't take in 60 grams of carbs right now, and then you try to go do 120 grams of carbs, you are going to be racing to the porta potty and not the finish line, and that will be your day, right? Like, it's just, and it's extremely uncomfortable. But if you start to train yourself and incrementally step up, and then it just becomes a part of it. Like, my rule is, if I'm pedaling, I'm eating. And that doesn't mean that every pedal stroke I'm taking something in, but I need to have a nutrition plan, and I need to know what I'm taking in for every single time that I ride. Because if I don't do that, have you noticed this too, Nate? If I drop back on that, it's hard for my body to then just go right back up to 120 grams again. Like, I need some time.
Yeah, so I have no science to back this up, but what I think is happening is I think there are bacteria in your stomach that is really good at, while you're working out, at eating carbs. And the more you do feed it, the more those happen. And because it's different, like you can have a carb-rich diet in general, but if you don't eat while training, like it's different. So I don't know if there's a certain type of bacteria that does that, but I think it's if you don't keep it up, like you said, your gut flora can change pretty quickly, just in a couple weeks, and then you'll lose it. And then you got to train it back up. Or what happens to me is I either feel extremely nauseous or I get crazy gas if I don't do it. And now I've kind of got this a good like amount where on certain days I do a little bit bigger. For like 2-hour rides, I'll do like 100 grams per hour. 90-minute ride, maybe I'll do 100 grams the first hour, and the last hour I'll just do like a drink, but like a salt drink, a pH drink. So precision hydration. But I'm not going another 50 grams on that last hour, because I have other days, like the next day is going to be 2, and then I get to eat a little bit more of real food afterwards, and I like doing that. So that's a balance that I found that's worked really well. And when I go do the really upper end in a race, I don't have any issues with my stomach, and I probably should still try to go a little bit higher, but it just feels, Dom, feels amazing. Like Amber said, to be able to pass people at the end. And at stage 2, I came out and what's his face? I can't remember his name now. Noah was right in front of me on the single track. So I took 3 minutes out of him on the first climb, and then he went in the single track and he beat me by a lot because it's, technical. And then coming out of it, I saw him and I just blew by him, and I did, I don't know how many, 330 watts or something for the last hour, the last 30 minutes, and got to put another, I think 7 minutes on him in the last 30 or 40 minutes of the race, which is pretty cool to be able to have that kind of performance at the end of a race.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And don't underestimate. I mean, I don't know if you're racing out there in Yorkshire, but if you are, and other people are bonking at the end of the race, boy, you can gain a lot of time, because if somebody's bonking, they can lose a lot of time, and it can happen really fast at the end of a race. So don't be that person, and just be the person who can be the one gaining.
This is something about Cape Epic. I'm actually worried about 2 people. It's Chad and Brandon. Brandon, because Brandon doesn't eat a ton of food, and I think he's getting better at it. But before, in his previous races, he's talking about, he would do a half Ironman and he would say, I had a gel the whole half Ironman. And he goes, I did great until the last 3 miles. And then he was like walking the last 3 miles.
Imagine.
And then Chad has been historically on long rides, Chad, you either get cramps or you bonk at the very end, and you have a big drop off in power, where before that you're doing great. So Chad, what are you going to do to address that during Cape Epic?
Exactly what I just described. I'm trying to figure out what my carbohydrate tolerance is. And right now it's low. And I know that I can only take on so much before I start to feel GI distress. So I'm trying to incrementally nudge that up. And it's not just happening on the bike too. I'm seeing to it that immediately after I'm having carbohydrate, that my diet is a little more carbohydrate rich, just small changes, but changes that I suspect over time, maybe a couple weeks down the road, I can add that additional gel or a handful of more blocks, and I won't get that same discomfort. So it's a process.
I feel like it's a little bit like training, where my performance increase in this is I go into the discomfort zone. It's just like doing VO2 max intervals. It's got to hurt a little bit, and then your body's like, oh, I'll start doing this. I don't try to get it where every day is easy, or like, I don't feel nauseous.
I agree. There's a certain level of discomfort that you can work through. But honestly, I've got enough time that it's already uncomfortable enough to do most of what I'm doing right now on the bike without adding that on top of it. So one thing at a time.
And then,
this is, one good point to add with this. Cape Epic is in March, and Chad has been working at this already. So this shows that if you can't crack this nut, so to speak, right now, don't worry about it. Like, it takes time. And this is smart that Chad is working on it with such a long way.
Yeah. I mean, in addition to working your way up in amount, pay attention to type, right? So maybe there are certain forms of carbohydrate that are easier for you to get down. Maybe you need to drink it in liquid form. Maybe I have a really hard time with bars and solid foods. The most solid food that I can really stomach are kind of like gummy or block type fuel. Those work really, really well for me. I can eat those all day long. I don't have much palate fatigue when it comes to those. I really like maple syrup too. Untapped maples is a great one.
Just gonna say that between the UCAN Superstarch and the maple syrups, so I've got my slow carb and my fast carb, and so far that's been working quite well. I'd like to have more things to throw at it, because I don't know, honestly, geez, do they provide anything for us? I don't think they do, right? Aid stations?
Yeah, aid stations will be stocked, at least.
And we
I don't know what's with COVID, but yeah.
Okay, so as we get closer to that, I'll start to consider what they'll be stocked with and take a look at that.
And then for Brandon's going to have Amber, and I'm not worried about it, because I think Amber's going to like tell him to do stuff, and Brandon will listen. And he can eat, so I don't think it's an issue as long as someone's reminding him to eat. Especially because for Brandon too, no offense to Amber, but Brandon's like a watt per kg higher than you, so a lot of it will feel easy to him, and I'm not sure he will be thinking about eating enough. You know what I mean? Of where it's just kind of, he'll be more concerned about the descent rather than eating food. But with Amber there reminding him, and I have no question that you will eat like a pro. By the way, the pros between stages, they eat so much, people.
Yeah.
This is like my 3rd stage race where I've stayed in Airbnb with top level pros. They eat just as much or more than me.
And Nate
they're
eats
like,
a lot.
oh, I feel so full, but I gotta do one more. And they're just like eating more, like another bowl of cereal. It is insane how much they eat. And when I've stayed with regular people, they don't do that.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a marked difference. And so last point I want to make on this too is when you, I think that there's a connotation tied to, well, if you're pushing really hard, it makes sense to fuel yourself. But if you're not, it doesn't, because you can make it through. You're not trying to make it through. You're trying to get through something with enough fuel so that your body isn't worn down for the next day when you're talking about a stage race. So that's why for Brandon, even though it doesn't feel tough, and that's why even at a race like Leadville doesn't really feel hard for the majority of that race if you're
Until it
pacing it
does.
properly, until it really does. And then there's no way to recover. So those sort of that sort of pace and this connotation that a lot of people form where, yeah, okay, so you're riding really hard, so you need to take that in. Or, oh, it's a really long ride, so you need to take it in versus a short one. I promise you, Nino Schurter is not just drinking water. Kate Courtney isn't just drinking water during an XCO race. It's only 90 minutes, but they're still taking in carbohydrates. So we build a lot of these reasons, and I don't know why we're so obsessed with starving ourselves instead of fueling ourselves and nourishing ourselves. And we build all these rules to kind of say, well, I don't need to eat here. I don't need to eat here. Let's all of us listening to this change that script. And instead of be people that are looking for reasons to starve ourselves, looking for reasons to nourish ourselves. And if we do that, we get faster.
There's two reasons.
It works.
One is, I think, this may not be hold true for elite and for everyone. Some new research that Tim Pojakar was putting up, but the idea of doing a fasted aerobic ride can have aerobic adaptations that some people are chasing. So for Derek, for Dialed Health, that could be something, we've talked about this before, where he has no more time and maybe his aerobic rides he's doing early in the morning without any food, and he can still recover, because that's the big thing. If you can't recover and it takes away from your intensity, you don't want to do that. So that's one side of it. But people will take that and say, well, this is the Nate aspect, right? If I don't eat during these little ones, what if I don't eat during my intense sweet spot in VO2 max? That means it'll just be better, right? And then you get into that trap of, well, your performance suffers and the next day suffers and recovery suffers. The other thing is that we've talked about this a lot on the podcast, but most cyclists want to lose weight or lower body fat. And they think that if they don't eat carbohydrates, they'll burn more fat during their ride, and thus they will be leaner overall, which I know it makes, like, you write that part in paper, like, oh, I'm not doing this, so I'm going to burn more fat. But overall, we talk about kilojoules overall for the week and having a caloric deficit during the week of losing weight. And we've talked about it too, of the amount of protein you eat and all that sort of stuff, that if you fuel your workouts, you're actually farther ahead. You're doing more kilojoules. You're getting stronger. Your FTP is higher. Every time your FTP is higher, do you guys notice this too? The more fit you are, the easier it is. Like, your body comp just changes naturally. And it's just like a snowball that starts happening. Your FTP goes up, and then your body composition improves, where it's really hard to keep, if your FTP is the same, to get your body composition improved without really limiting yourself. But when you get both sides, you get a lot faster that way. And it's kind of fun.
This is actually a point, and it's a bit of a critique for Derek actually on this, because a lot of the time you'll see on his Instagram that he'll be doing like a shred challenge where he'll basically be dropping down carbs as much as he can to try to get shredded. The reason Derek looks the way he looks, it's not because he did a shred challenge for 30 days. The reason he looks the way he looks is because he's managed to be able to do so much work with his body, whether it's on the bike or in the gym, for so long that sort of thing, when you're able to do all of that work, that changes body composition in a meaningful way. And that's the sort of thing that when you compound that months after months, that's where you really start to see a change. I mean, Chad, you've mentioned that too, like back in your day when you were really truly fit and you were winning races and doing all of this. Well, when Chad was Chad, right?
When Chad was like Big Daddy Chad. Yeah, I remember those days. Yeah,
exactly. Just wrecking shop on NorCal and Northern Nevada, right? So in those days though, Chad, you were doing so much work. You were training people indoors. You were training on your bike, doing that. You were racing a ton. And as a result, you were having pizza and beer, and you were and ice cream before races and after races.
All three, all the time.
And you weren't fat, right?
No, as lean as I've ever been.
Yep.
Yeah, because it wasn't often that I did it. I didn't plan my training. So for the fact that it's kind of shameful to admit, but I was training a bunch of people. A lot of people were coming in and out of my studio, but I was running a business first and foremost. So at the end of the week, the amount of training I did wasn't because I set out to do this much training. It was how much training I had to do to support the business. But a pleasant side effect of that was that I was really fit and I could eat whatever I wanted and I could race really well. And my watts per kg were only improving all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Seek to do more work. If you can do more work, then you'll get more
A lot of
fit.
work.
That's it.
I remember, so quick story. This is where how I met Chad. It is CompuTrainer Studios, which is like the pre-birth of TrainerRoad. And the TrainerRoad started because Chad charged me too much. It was $20 a workout. And I was like, I can't do
How
it.
I had to eat,
Chad.
man.
I'm so glad. Well, if you would have charged me $2 a workout, this would not be here right now. So
Yeah, and I
everybody,
wouldn't be
thank
eating
you,
pizza
Chad.
and ice cream. I'd be eating ramen and water.
Yeah. But Chad would jump on. I think my FTP when I first did it was like 222. And this is when I was training as a triathlete and we're going. And Chad would jump on and be like, this is my second workout of the day. And he would just like start out at 350 watts. And Chad has this, like, if you've ever seen Chad ride, this crazy still upper body where none of it moves and just his legs. And he's putting out 350 watts. And that's like, you know, almost my sprint level power. And I'm like, who is this guy with these giant legs? He's like, he had a strong upper body too. And I was just extremely impressed that it was his second workout in the day, where me, like an hour-long trainer ride seemed like a huge ask. And my intervals were at like 180 watts. And he's just almost doing twice the amount and making it look easy. You remember those days, Chad?
Those were the days. I do remember them.
Those were the days.
They just hurt me these days. They pain me. Should wait. But on Dom's question though, we only address nutrition. I mean, there are some other suggestions.
Good point. Yep.
So let's hit those real quick.
Gearing.
Anyone want to take gearing?
Gearing. Get
Yes.
the gears, all of them.
Yeah.
Use the
Honestly,
gears.
if you're gearing yourself out to the point where you're pedaling at a cadence that is far outside of what's you're used to, doesn't even have to be far outside, just outside of what you're used to. And also, if you're pedaling at anything that's like, if you're saying 50 RPM or below, that's also where we start to get into a point where I personally consider it a bit unreasonable, right? Like, which, and yes, I would be that pretentious as to say such a thing on a climb, that it's a bit unreasonable, but
Climbs
it's
are
just
unreasonable.
yeah, these climbs are unreasonable, but it don't put yourself in a spot where you're just working so far out of what's familiar and also what your body is prepared for.
Well, yeah, and these days it's not as easy to get pulled into the trap of the ego-driven corn cob. I mean, my biggest gear is a 21 sort of nonsense. Finding appropriate gearing for really severe climbs is it is another example of low-hanging fruit, and probably one that Dom's not missing. But if you find yourself early in the ride, and this goes to my second point, is you need to figure out how to conserve earlier on. If you're falling apart later and you know your nutrition isn't the issue, you're probably pacing poorly or doing something else that's not lending to a strong finish. And gearing could be partly responsible for that. If, you know, for instance, on all those other climbs, you have to mash at 50 or 60 RPMs to get to the top of it. That is going to take quite a toll on your muscles later on in the ride. But do recognize that anything you do earlier in a long ride is a form of pacing, and it's not pacing in the strictest steady state pacing sort of sense where I have a 40K TT and I need to pace at this rate the entire time. But instead, it's more about doling out those heavier efforts, and those heavier efforts are often obvious. You know, you can think about the whole burning a match idea, but sometimes they're not as obvious. And gearing could be one of the less obvious ways of burning a match, where you have to grind to the top of a climb because you just didn't want to put on that 32.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I sorry, the Zoom interruption pattern. Oftentimes in pro racing, if we have a climb, I mean, I can think of a handful of particular stages in crits where there's like a steep, punchy climb, which you know you can big ring, but you don't want to do that early in the race. You can put out the same level of power in an easier gear at a higher cadence, and doing that earlier in the race, at least for the first half, or maybe even saving that big ring for the end. Those are things that you can do to really save, like just lower, it doesn't tax your muscles quite as much. And then in the end, you can really come in strong with a bigger gear. So if you're really struggling with the climbing later in a ride, I would suggest experimenting with lighter gears. You can still put out the same power, just at a higher cadence, and it can be kind of easier on your knees and tendons too. So it's worth a shot.
I want to talk about, let's get on the record right now about gearing size for different people. I want to do both for road and mountain bike, because this is, when you read about it on the internet, I feel like it's always ego driven. And there's always that person who comes in and goes, oh, I ride a standard 23 or 21, right? And that's all you need. Okay, so this is, I'm gonna be road first. This is for places that aren't flat. If you live in Florida, do whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. So this is like, you have hills, there's over 6% sustained, right? Those sort of thing. If you are,
if a freeway overpass constitutes a hill, just
we don't
skip
care.
forward.
Yeah. So if you are, other than if you are going to sprint for a win, so if you're just riding for fun, you don't need it. But unless you're going to sprint for a win, and basically usually just in a flat crit, is there any, do you need a standard? If you're a regular rider, like below 4 watts per kilo? I can't think of a reason.
I personally don't think you do.
I don't think you do either. I think the mid compact, that one is probably, you might be a road racer, but you also want to sprint a little bit, but you're not like sprinting at 40 miles per hour, because you can still sprint really fast with a 32 in the back. That is a really good range. And that's probably anywhere between 3 and 4 watts per kilo. That's going to give you a little top end and stuff. But if you're finding that you have really steep, long climbs, yeah, that's what I do too. Steep, long climbs, you should do I would recommend in your 3.5 or below, or even 4 and below, and it's a really long climb, I think you should be doing, 1132 with a compact. Unless there's some reason where I have to sprint at 38 miles per hour, which I don't think a lot of people do. I think a lot of people could sprint with compacts based on the races that I've done against some top level people and still win.
How many times have we been beat by juniors with junior gears, in a
0.
sprint? Right. So
I'm just kidding. Me actually 0, because it does hurt them because they can't sprint that fast.
No, but here's the thing. Look at them and look at how they sprint. Like, at least in our local region, we have really fast juniors that sprint very well with very, very hindered gearing, right? Like they have small chain rings and everything else. And we see this with track sprinters. We see this with sprinters and Grand Tours, everything else. They are not sprinting at 70 RPM. They are sprinting at a really high RPM. And if anything, it's probably argued that all of us could do better with our sprint technique to get to the point where we can actually sprint at a higher cadence, right, Amber?
For sure. Track sprinters in particular use much lighter gearing than road riders, generally speaking. And I know a lot of top level professional women who are sprint specialists win a lot of races, and they win races in the Pro Tour or Women's World Tour on compact gearing. And they do it with cadence.
Yep. And they're faster than you, bro. Right? Like, most likely, unless your name is Justin Williams. Like,
yeah, straight up. Sorry, Chad, you were going to say something?
Oh, no, I was just agreeing that leg speed is underrated. Yeah, you need to be able to crank out big watts, but you need to have fast legs too, or at least a nice balance between them.
Okay. I want to go into mountain biking now, cross country, because we had this on the forum thread. And this also is it's really about your terrain, and your watts per kg. And this, I think, is a lot of ego driven. So I wrote down on the forum, I said, if you're 6 watts per kilo, 36, you can run that and you're going to be fine. And I'm assuming a 1050 cassette right now. 5 watts per kilo, anywhere from a 34 to a 36, depending on terrain. 4 watts per kilo, 32 to 34, 3 watts per kilo, 30 to 32, 2 watts per kilo, 28 to 30. And now, so Shimano has a 51 in the back, or SRAM now has a 52. If you go to a 52, you can actually go up 1 chainring size, and it will be the same as if you had a 50 with the smaller chainring size. So the big thing about this, that people you can get up the hills, but we're talking about how fast you can race. So if you don't have a sustained fire road descent of 2%, and that's really the only time that I think the really big chain rings help, because there are other times if you're descending, you're not pedaling when you're on a negative 10% descent, is that when you're climbing, let's say you're climbing single track and you're climbing at threshold, which is very common. And then there's just this little pitch that's 15 seconds, but it is steep. And you have 2 choices. You can either go over threshold, right? And really big gear it, Or if you have more gears in the back, you can click down a couple and stay at threshold. Now, if it is a sustained workout, you guys have probably done this before, be at threshold in a TrainerRoad workout, and now kick up above threshold for 2 minutes and now try to finish that workout. It is so hard, right? You will put out less kilojoules in that time, because really going up the hill is how many kilojoules can you put out over the amount of time. And that's what equals average power. It's your average power that gets you up the hill faster, not how like spiky it is. So on this situation, if you have an extra gear, and just for those little pitch ups, you can be more smooth and you can be more, you can put out more kilojoules over time. You'll go up the hill faster. So it's easy to say, hey, I'm so strong, I need a 36, and it feels good and it looks cool, but it might actually make you a lot slower.
So a couple things to consider with this. Number one, it's really easy to change chain rings on a mountain bike. It's 4 bolts in almost every case, and then it's done. So that's really quick and easy. So feel free to change them liberally. It's for me when I'm training on the road on my mountain bike, which is what I do. When I'm doing my TrainerRoad outside workouts, I'm almost always on my mountain bike. Yeah,
what about chain length? Do you have to change that though?
No, for me, going from a 32 to a 36, I don't have to change my chain length. So it's fine within that. It's within that realm. I'm sure it's probably not as perfectly efficient, right? But so keep that in mind. So it's easy to change them out, number one. And when I'm doing all of my outside workouts, I always have I put a 36 on, and man, probably a 38 would probably be better in most cases, because I don't do my workouts on really steep climbs. I do my workouts on flats and or consistent pitches, right? So it's fine there. But if I'm racing, I'm almost always probably going to be racing with like a 34. And if I'm going to something like, and this is at like 4.8 watts per kilogram right now. And at 4.8 watts per kilogram, I'm racing with a 34, except if I'm going to Canada to do single track 6, I'm going to put a 32 on there maybe, or maybe I just put a 52 cassette on the back. But one thing to keep in mind too is, so yes, when your chain wraps around a smaller cog or a smaller chain ring, there is more drag. I don't know how much that is though. That might be a fraction of a watt. It might be 2 watts. I don't know. But when you wrap around a 32 versus a 36, that 36, there's less bend in the chain, right? At least it's not as tight of a bend, I should say. But the real main reason a lot of people do this, and I think even riders like Nino run this and everything else, when they have a 36 or a 38 on their bike, the gears on the back that they spend the most time in with that chain ring give them the straightest chain line. And that's another thing that they go for. However, that also, I don't know if that's just dogmatic at this point or if there's actual data behind that, because we do know that modern chains don't deal necessarily like in a poor manner like they used to with aggressive chain lines. Like they're actually designed to have more flex in there. So there's a lot of things where I don't know, I don't have the data to be able to quantify the difference there, but that's kind of the reasoning behind why they do it.
Sorry, I was muted. There is, and it depends on, I forget who did it, but I think it's about a watt to be on a 1x to be kind of like off changed. And you are not Nino. Nino knows this when he's doing his XCO races, knows the entire course, probably never ever going into the 50 or even one below, and probably never ever even maybe going into like an 11. Like they are so dialed and know exactly where they're going to be, and they're not going to be touching the end. So instead of being, as John's saying, is being on like closer to the small rings, that 36 just moves them a little bit back in the middle of the cassette. You are probably not like that. And you probably aren't looking at every course about what to do. And that is why you probably don't need a 36. Unless you're 6 watts per kilo, then you're probably fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So these are all gearing tips that can help you guys with going through and approaching steep climbs. Because if you don't have those things, doesn't matter how great you fuel, it's going to be a really bad experience. And pacing as well. If you don't pace, then you're going to set yourself up for a poor experience.